Well, I think what's interesting about contour lines is there's such a diverse range of artists that are all looking at ideas of place and location from really different angles and different approaches. But in the essay that I wrote for the show, Pattern Soup, one of the things I talk about is dislocation. And I guess what I was trying to get at by saying dislocation is was also displacement. And I think that what the artists share is a sense of like an evocation of place rather than an explicit referencing of place. And what that does, I think, is really exciting in that it leaves space for the viewer. So when you're looking at an artwork by Kate Newby or Prunella Clough, you're sort of occupying lots of different spaces at the same time. You're seeing the materiality of the work. You're situated in your own body in the gallery, but your imagination is there to also kind of take you somewhere else. And I think that's what's really exciting. So I think this is really important, these kind of tangential kind of relationships to the land rather than a completely explicit static relationship to the landscape. Pattern could be loosely described as a repeatable motif that could be either figurative or abstract. I think of abstraction, there's probably a few different definitions of abstraction, but for me it's about the transformation of the world or reality into something else. So it's a sense of something. So that may be simplifying reality, and it's more about an emotional connection to the landscape perhaps. But I think there's an interesting question here about where pattern stops and abstraction starts, or when abstraction stops and pattern starts, because I think maybe a more fundamental question for me is thinking about the difference between pattern and abstraction in terms of value. When we think of abstraction, we can think of like more high-minded ideas of abstract painting in modern art. Pattern often is sort of used much more pejoratively in terms of decoration, perhaps. So pattern may be something that is attached to kind of interior design or fashion or something like that, but I think what's interesting about that is maybe the kind of gendered assumptions or the kind of class implications of that. And sort of really questioning those value systems. That's something I'm really interested in, is that maybe they're not dissimilar, but the way that they've been talked about historically are quite separate. And I think what artists are doing now is really trying to upend and dissolve some of those kind of policed boundaries a bit more, which I think is really exciting. It's interesting to think about pattern optically and visually, but also pattern is a form of connection. As a curator, I make patterns, I connect and create conversations between objects and ideas. And it's what our mind is doing all the time, is trying to make sense of and create connections with the things that we're seeing. One of the things that's happening in contour lines and what a lot of artists are doing now is really trying to dissolve those boundaries between art and craft, abstraction, figuration, pattern. When I talk to artists and work with them, these ideas and categories aren't that important to them anymore, and I think that's really exciting. Lubna Chowdhary talks about her work being hybridized, and I think you could talk about that in relation to a lot of the practices here. It's more about a tone or a sensibility rather than work being confined to a particular medium.